All right, this is going to be the last video in our set of quadratic videos when we're talking about solving quadratic equations. So we have a few methods so far. Now remember our first method, and generally the quickest and easiest method is going to be factoring. We know we're going to do something because we have x squared. We can't just solve it like normal. So in this one, I'm going to move the 2 to the end. I have negative 10 on the top and 3 on the bottom. And I can come up with two numbers when I do that, right? So for factoring, I'm just going to do this real quick. That would give me 5 and negative 2, which would give me factors x plus 5 over 2, because I have to do bottoms up, x minus 2 over 2, and then I would either do bottoms up or simplify those, 2x plus 5, x minus 1. And you see pretty quickly there, I already have answers. X equals negative 5 over 2, and x equals 1. So when the numbers work out really well, factoring is a great method to use. We said in this middle one, this is from the last video that we watched, in this middle one, because we just have an x squared, there's no x term, this is one that's really going to be good for square roots. So I'm going to try to get x squared by itself. So this is going to give me 3x squared equals positive 18. I'm going to divide first, so x squared is going to equal 6. And then I'm going to take the square root. And remember, that gives me two answers. X is going to equal positive square root of 6, and x is going to equal the negative square root of 6. All right, those are both pretty quick methods. So in this last one, it looks a lot like the first one. It looks like maybe I should try factoring. There is an x term, so it doesn't make sense to do square roots. So I'm going to move the 2 to the end. It's going to give me 30 on the top and negative 6 on the bottom. And I know sometimes it gets confusing. We sit there and we think about the numbers for a while, but for 30, there are no factors that are going to give me negative 6. If you don't believe me, you can make a list. All right, those are all of our options, and none of those options give me negative 6. So this is an example of something that is not good for factoring and is going to lead us to have to use the quadratic formula. All right, so let's talk about exactly what that is and how it works. All right, so don't freak out on me in this formula. It is not nearly as hard to memorize as you might think it is. But before we even talk about the formula itself, I need to show you some important things about it. So remember, the quadratic formula, the whole purpose of this is to help us solve quadratic equations. So this right here, x equals, is just reminding us that we are solving for roots. That is what this formula is going to tell us, is roots or the zeros or x-intercepts or solutions, blah, 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 all those things, right? Some other things about this formula you might notice. Hopefully this looks familiar to you, right? Negative b over 2a, that's the axis of symmetry formula. And that's because if you think about on a for a parabola on a quadratic, the axis of symmetry runs down the middle, and these roots are on equal side from the axis of symmetry. So you start at the axis of symmetry and you go backwards however much and go forwards however much to hit the roots. And that should also bring up something else, this plus or minus, right? That's why there's plus or minus, because we're going forwards a certain amount and backwards a certain amount. So this plus or minus is to remind you that there are going to be two roots and that they're going to be equal distance from the axis of symmetry. All right, and then the last thing is this part underneath the square root symbol. So just the part underneath the square root symbol is called the discriminant. And it's kind of going to do almost what it sounds like. So, you know, to discriminate means to distinguish people based on certain characteristics. Well, the discriminant is going to tell us what kind of situation we have here. The discriminant is going to tell us if we have two real roots, if we have one real root, well, I should draw that better. All right, one real root, or if we have 0 real roots, which means my parabola is not crossing at all. And the examples for each of those, if the discriminant is greater than 0, if it's a positive number, that's going to give me two real roots, because I'm going to be taking the square root of something that has square roots. If the discriminant is equal 0, that's going to give me one solution, because if you think about it in our formula, I'm going to be plus or minusing just 0, and if you add 0 or subtract 0, that's going to give you the same answer twice. All right, so that's why we're going to get either one solution here, or that's why we call this a double root, because you're going to get the same thing twice. All right, and then the last one is if our discriminant is less than 0. If we're taking the square root of a negative number, that's not something we're allowed to do, which is going to indicate that this parabola is never going to cross the x-axis, so there are no real solutions, or we call that two imaginary solutions. We're going to dive more in depth to that discriminant thing here in a minute, but let's go ahead and try just a basic problem. I'm sorry, and I lied to you. We are going to try a problem, but first you need for me to sing to you, because what else would make your day better if I didn't sing to you? All right, so you know the song, Pop Goes the Weasel, from when you were a little kid, right? Da-dun, 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 da-dun. Okay, it's going to get stuck in your head, and I'll tell you, even as someone who took algebra in high school many, many years ago, I still sing this song in my head whenever I'm trying to write the formula out. All right, so this is going to help us memorize the formula. I'm going to point along as I go. All right, the formula is x equals negative b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. And the biggest thing I want to point out to you is that this says all over. This symbol right here, this division bar, goes all the way from the beginning of the negative b to the end of that discriminant. It is not part of this x side, but it does go all the way under. That's why we say all over 2a. All right, we're going to practice this a lot more in class tomorrow, so I'm just going to do one example with you so that you can kind of see where all the parts are coming from and not get too bogged down in some of the weird intricacies of this formula. All right, so the first thing we want to do is go ahead and name what our A, our B, and our C are. And this should not be that unfamiliar to you since we've done A and B for axis of symmetry anyway. So A goes with the x squared, it's just the 2. B is this number here in the middle with the x term, that's a negative 6. And C is there at the end, that's going to be 15. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and write out my formula. X equals, so I'm kind of singing it in my head, right? X equals negative B. Well, we talked about B is already negative, so like when we did axis of symmetry, this is now going to be positive 6. Plus or minus square root b squared. Now I'm going to do b squared. I'm actually going to do that part in my head, because if I don't, my calculator is likely to do some things incorrectly. So b squared, negative 6 squared, is positive 36, right? Negative 6 times negative 6 is positive 36. B squared minus 4ac. Notice I'm just writing those out as multiplication. All over 2a. So I'm just plugging in those values. The first part that you're going to want to simplify is this part that's underneath the square root, this discriminant. You can use a calculator to simplify that, so I'm going to do that right now. And when I do that, I'm actually going to type that in all as one thing. I literally typed in 36 minus 4 parentheses 2 parentheses 15. Okay, and when I do that, I'm going to get this answer, 6 plus or minus the square root. The square root symbol is still there because I didn't type it in my calculator. All I typed was the discriminant, the part underneath the square root symbol. So the square root of negative 84 all over 2 times 2 is 4. Okay, at this point, we want to think about what is this discriminant telling us. And this is the square root of a negative number, which means that right now, this is going to be no real solutions. Or we can say 2 imaginary, if you want to leave it at that. But either way, since they're not real, we can't actually go any further. So that's going to be the final answer, is that there's no real solutions. And I'm done. That's how we use the quadratic formula. So tomorrow we'll start with maybe 1 or 2 more of these problems to look at just some of the things that can maybe be a little bit different. But hopefully coming in tomorrow, hopefully you have the song at least in your head, possibly memorized. That would be super awesome. That might impress me and cause me to give you some extra checks. And then that you understand how to use the A, B, and C when you're using the formula.